Level 3 is solving quadratic equations by isolating the x squared term. Now I'm going to show you two different ways that you can do this. I definitely think one way is easier than the other way, but both ways are going to work out just fine. So whatever makes sense to you, I recommend you do that. So like I said, I'm going to show you these problems doing two different ways. Okay, so the first way is by isolating the x squared term. So if you remember when we had equations way back in like freshman year and sophomore year, we would have like 3x equals 27, and I'd ask you to solve for x. So I would go ahead and divide both sides by 3, and then I'd say x equals 9. So what we just did is we isolated the x term. Well, what we want to do in this unit is we want to isolate the x squared term, and we're going to take it one step further. So in example 8, I have 3x squared equals 27. Just like in the example problem I just did, I'm going to divide both sides by 3. So I'm isolating the x squared term, I'm getting that by itself, and I get x squared equals 9. Now the added step is to get rid of this squared. So I think, how do I get rid of a square? Well, I want to square root it. Okay, remember when we squared a square root, it undid it? Well, when we square root a square, that also undoes it. So I'll just be left with an x equals a 3, and you also have x equals negative 3. Because if I'm thinking about this going backwards and plugging things back into x, a positive 3 squared is 9, and a negative 3 squared is also 9. So I need to make sure that I have both answers in the problem. I'm sorry, that didn't make sense. Both answers to the problem. Okay, so that's one way that you can go about doing this. The second way that you can go about doing this, I'm going to write this over here in red, is going to be 3x squared minus or equals 27. So what we would want to do is we want to get it equal to 0, just like we did in our level 2s. So I'm going to say 3x squared minus 27 equals 0. And I'm going to go ahead and factor it, and this is just a level 2 question. I'm going to factor out a 3. And I'm left with x squared minus 9 equals 0. And then I'll factor those leftovers. And then I'll set each factor equal to 0. So x equals 3 and x equals negative 3. So both ways you're going to get the same answer. Again, I think one way is easier than the next, but I think a lot of students have success doing it the way I just did it in red because it doesn't change much from level 2 to level 3. So whatever makes sense to you. Now I'm going to go ahead and do number 9, the way that I started by isolating the x squared term, and then I'll show you the other way. So here we go. In number 9, I want to look for what term is squared, okay? You see I have x minus 2 squared. That's not just x squared, but that's the term that I want to isolate. Whatever is squared, you want to get that by itself. So I'm going to write this off to the side. 4x plus 1 equals 145. And I'm just going to write that there just because it kind of clues me in and reminds me how to solve that type of equation. It takes away the x minus 2 squared if that gets me confused. So in the old problems, I would subtract 1, so that's exactly what I want to do in the new problem. Okay, now in the old problem, I want to divide by 4, and I'll have x equals, let's see, 36. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to divide by 4. So I have x minus 2 squared equals 36. Now, in the old problem, I would be done because x is alone. In the new problem, I need to square root both sides. Now, here's where a lot of students make a mistake. What they say is x minus 2 equals 6. And then they'll add 2 and say x equals 8 or x equals negative 8. But don't be that student, okay? Don't make this mistake, because remember, what did you square root? You square rooted the 36. So whatever number comes out of that number becomes a plus or a minus. So what you don't want to get, yes, you'll get one answer to be 8, But don't forget that you want to write an answer of x minus 2 equals negative 6 and solve both of those individually. So remember, whatever you square root, that becomes plus or minus, not just your final answer. It's not always going to be the same number. Like this, I get x equals 8 and x equals negative 4. Okay, very different. So just be careful when you're doing that. Okay, here's the other way that you can do that problem. So the other way that you can do this problem is a little bit longer. What we'd have to do is we have to take this x minus 2 squared term and FOIL it out. So I'll write that twice. X minus 2 plus 1. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and FOIL this out. So I get 4x squared minus 4x plus 4 plus 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and distribute the 4 to everything. So I have 4x squared minus 16x plus 16 plus 1 equals 145. Okay, now I know I probably lost some of you because it looks like a lot of work, but again, this just turns into a level 2 type of question where you want to get everything on one side. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 145 from both sides. So 4x squared minus 16x plus 16 minus 144 equals 145. Whoops, nope, equals 0 now, sorry. And then 16 plus 144. So 4x squared minus 16x is 128. Okay, now I'm going to factor out a greatest common factor here. So 4 and then x squared minus 16x and 128 divided by 4 is going to be negative 32. I'm going to keep on factoring. Whoops, I see what I did. 16, I forgot to divide 16 by 4. That'll make it easier. So let's see, we can have 8 and 4. So minus 8 plus 4. So then x minus 8 equals 0, so x equals 8. And x plus 4 equals 0, so x equals negative 4. Okay, so again, it's a little bit longer, but for those of you who are confused with the square roots of what turns positive, what turns negative, and are good at factoring, you feel comfortable with that, this might be a good way to go. So again, totally up to you. I'm fine with either way, whatever makes sense to you guys and whatever makes you the most successful.